I adopted a child, only to discover they're the heir to a dangerous crime syndicate. Adopting Sophie was the best decision I'd ever made. I'd always wanted to be a mother, but years of failed relationships and a grueling work schedule made it seem like an impossible dream. Then came Sophie. She was 6 years old, with wide brown eyes that seemed far too serious for someone her age. The adoption agency told me her background was complicated, but I didn't press for details. I figured every child in the system had a story, and it wasn't my place to pry. When I brought her home, Sophie was quiet, reserved, and incredibly observant. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words carried a weight far beyond her years. The first few months were blissful. Sure, there were challenges, adjusting to each other's routines, navigating her shy demeanor, but they were small hurdles compared to the joy of having her in my life. Then the letters started. The first one arrived in a plain envelope, with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words written in bold, black ink, "We want her." I stared at the note, my heart pounding. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank, maybe a mistake. But when the second letter came a week later, my denial began to crack. "You don't understand. She doesn't belong to you." I didn't know what to do. My friends brushed it off as harmless, probably just some bored kid messing around, one of them said. But Sophie's reaction made me question everything. When I showed her the letters, she went pale, her small hands trembling. "Do you know who sent these?" I asked gently. She shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know," she whispered, but I could tell she was lying. A week later, things escalated. I was walking Sophie home from school when a sleek black car pulled up beside us. The windows were tinted, but I could feel the eyes watching us. The door opened, and a man in a sharp suit stepped out. He was tall, with an air of authority that made my skin crawl. "Ms. Lane," he said, addressing me by name. "We need to talk about Sophie." I pulled Sophie closer, my heart racing. "Who are you?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A friend of her family." "She doesn't have family," I snapped. "She's my daughter now." The man's expression darkened. "You've made a mistake, Ms. Lane. Sophie isn't just any child. She's the rightful heir to a very powerful organization, and we intend to bring her home." I backed away, clutching Sophie tightly. "Leave us alone, or I'll call the police." The man chuckled, his calm demeanor unnerving. "You can try, but this isn't something you can fight. Sophie's destiny has already been decided." Without another word, he stepped back into the car. The vehicle sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. That night, I locked every door and window in the house, paranoia gnawing at me. I needed answers, but Sophie was reluctant to talk. She sat at the kitchen table, her small hands clutching a mug of hot chocolate. "Sophie," I said, kneeling beside her, "who were those men? What do they want?" She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. "They're bad people," she whispered. "I don't want to go with them." "You won't," I promised, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'll protect you, but I need to know the truth. Who are they?" Sophie hesitated, then whispered 2 words that sent a chill down my spine. "The Syndicate." Would you like me to continue with part 2, where Sophie's connection to the Syndicate is revealed and the danger intensifies? If you're not following our channel, you might never see it again. But if you're subscribed, congratulations. You'll always have access to the most interesting stories whenever you want to watch and listen. The name Sophie whispered, "The Syndicate," sent chills coursing through my body. I'd heard it before, in passing. News stories about a vast criminal network that controlled everything from illegal trade to political corruption. It was the kind of thing you saw in crime dramas, not in real life, and certainly not in connection with your child. I crouched beside Sophie, my heart pounding. "What do you mean, the Syndicate? How are you connected to them?" Her eyes filled with tears, her small hands clutching the mug so tightly I thought it might crack. My dad, she said quietly. He was one of them. Her words opened a floodgate. Over the next hour, she pieced together a story that felt too big for her small voice. Her father, her biological father, had been a powerful figure in the syndicate, not just a member, but someone at the top, a leader. I didn't know much, she said, her voice trembling. He never told me what he did, but people were always coming to our house. Scary people. What happened to him? I asked gently. Sophie looked away, her lip quivering. He got hurt. I don't know how, but one day he didn't come back. My mom said it wasn't safe for us anymore, so we ran. And then? She died, Sophie whispered, her voice cracking. In a car accident. I was put in the system after that. I thought I was free. Her words hung in the air, heavy and heartbreaking. That night, after putting Sophie to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, my mind racing. The syndicate had found her. They knew where she was. And worse, they wanted her back. I didn't know what they intended to do with her, but I knew enough about people like them to understand one thing. Their interest wasn't benevolent. I needed help. The next morning, I made an appointment with a private investigator named Jordan Reese. Jordan came highly recommended by a friend and had a reputation for digging into situations that law enforcement wouldn't, or couldn't, touch. When I arrived at Jordan's small, cluttered office, the investigator greeted me with a firm handshake and a curious expression. "What's the case?" Jordan asked, motioning for me to sit. I hesitated, then laid everything out. The adoption, the letters, the man who approached me, and Sophie's revelations. When I finished, Jordan sat back, their face serious. "You're not exaggerating? This is the syndicate?" I nodded. "Sophie is terrified of them. I don't know what they want, but I can't let them take her." Jordan leaned forward, their tone sharp. "Here's the thing about people like that. They don't make empty threats. If they've found her, they're not going to back off. But if her father really was high-ranking, there's more going on here than you realize." Over the next few days, Jordan dug into Sophie's past, uncovering pieces of a puzzle that painted a grim picture. Her father, Henry Connors, wasn't just a leader in the syndicate. He'd been groomed to take over the entire operation. His sudden disappearance had caused a power vacuum, leading to infighting and chaos within the organization. And now, the syndicate wanted Sophie, not just as a pawn, but as their heir. They think she's the key to reuniting their fractured leadership, Jordan explained grimly during our next meeting. If they get their hands on her, they'll use her to cement their power. She'll never be safe. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Sophie wasn't just a target. She was their future. That night, I sat with Sophie in her room, trying to stay calm for her sake. "Am I going to have to go with them?" she asked, her voice small. "No," I said firmly, pulling her into a hug. "I won't let that happen." "But they're so powerful," she whispered. I kissed the top of her head, my resolve hardening. They don't know who they're messing with. But my determination was put to the test the very next day. Sophie and I were at the park when I noticed the same black car from before parked across the street. Two men in suits stood nearby, their eyes fixed on us. My heart pounded as I grabbed Sophie's hand. "We need to go." She looked up at me, confused. "Why?" "Just trust me," I said, keeping my voice steady. We hurried to the car, but before I could pull out of the parking lot, the men approached. One of them tapped on my window, his expression calm but menacing. I cracked it slightly, keeping the doors locked. "Ms. Lane," he said smoothly, "we're here to discuss Sophie's future." "She's my daughter," I snapped. "There's nothing to discuss." The man's smile didn't falter. "You've made a mistake, taking in a child who doesn't belong to you. But we're willing to overlook it, if you cooperate." My grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Leave us alone, or I'll call the police." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "The police can't protect you from us. But if you hand over Sophie, we'll consider this resolved. No one has to get hurt." I didn't wait for him to finish. Slamming the car into reverse, I sped out of the parking lot, my hands trembling. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw the black car following us. The black car followed us through the city streets, its ominous presence sending my pulse into overdrive. I gripped the steering wheel, glancing at Sophie in the rearview mirror. She was pale, her small hands clutching the seatbelt. "It's going to be okay," I said, trying to sound reassuring, but I didn't believe it. The car stayed close, its headlights glaring like unblinking eyes. I made a sharp turn onto a side street, then another, weaving through the narrow roads in a desperate attempt to lose them. "Mom," Sophie said, her voice trembling, "are they going to catch us?" "Not if I can help it," I replied, forcing steel into my voice. I finally spotted an underground parking lot and pulled in, weaving between the rows of cars. I parked behind a large SUV and killed the engine, motioning for Sophie to stay quiet. We waited, the silence broken only by the sound of our breathing. My heart pounded as I watched the entrance, half expecting the black car to barrel in after us. But minutes passed, and there was no sign of them. I exhaled shakily. I think we lost them. That night, I called Jordan from a payphone, my nerves frayed. "They followed us," I said, keeping my voice low. "Are you safe now?" Jordan asked. "For the moment, but I don't know how long that'll last." "They're not going to stop." Jordan was silent for a moment, then said, "We need to get you out of here. Somewhere they can't find you." "Where?" "They seem to know everything." "There's a safe house I've used for clients before," Jordan said. "It's off the grid. I'll send you the address. Go there, and I'll meet you tomorrow." The safe house was tucked away in a wooded area miles outside the city. It was small and unassuming, with thick curtains covering the windows and reinforced locks on the doors. Sophie clung to me as we stepped inside, her fear palpable. "Mom, are we going to stay here forever?" "No," I said firmly, kneeling to her level, "just until we figure out how to stop them." "But what if we can't?" she asked, her voice breaking. I pulled her into a hug, my own tears threatening to fall. "We will. I promise." Jordan arrived the next morning, carrying a laptop and a folder thick with papers. "They're getting bolder," I said as we sat at the small kitchen table. "They're desperate," Jordan replied. "The syndicate is fractured, and they see Sophie as their way to bring everyone back in line. But they've also made a mistake." "What mistake?" Jordan opened the laptop, showing me a series of documents. "They're not as untouchable as they think. I've traced some of their recent activities, money laundering, bribery, even a few unsanctioned hits. They're sloppy, and if we can get the right authorities involved, we can take them down." "How?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We expose them," Jordan said simply, "but it's risky. If they catch wind of what we're doing, they'll come after you harder than ever." The decision weighed on me. Going after the syndicate was dangerous, but running forever wasn't an option. Sophie deserved more than a life spent in fear. "I'll do it," I said finally, "whatever it takes to protect her." Jordan got to work immediately, compiling evidence and contacting trusted sources within law enforcement. But the syndicate wasn't sitting idle. That night, as Sophie and I tried to sleep, the sound of a car engine outside the safe house jolted me awake. I crept to the window, my heart sinking as I saw the black car parked in the driveway. They'd found us. I woke Jordan, my voice urgent. "They're here." Jordan grabbed their phone and began dialing. "Get Sophie. Lock yourselves in the bathroom. I'll handle this." "No," I said, shaking my head. "We're not splitting up." Jordan hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. Let's stick together. But we need to get out of here." As we gathered Sophie and prepared to leave, the front door burst open with a deafening crash. "Run!" Jordan shouted, shoving me toward the back door. We bolted into the woods, the sound of heavy footsteps and shouted orders close behind. "Keep moving," I yelled to Sophie, gripping her hand tightly. The forest was dark, the ground uneven, but adrenaline drove us forward. Behind us, flashlights cut through the shadows, getting closer with each passing second. We reached a small clearing, and Jordan motioned for us to stop. "Hide here," they whispered. "What about you?" I asked. Jordan smiled grimly. "I'll buy you time. Take Sophie and keep running." Before I could protest, Jordan disappeared into the trees, their footsteps deliberate and loud, drawing the pursuers away. Sophie and I crouched in the bushes, holding our breaths as the voices and flashlights faded into the distance. My heart ached with fear for Jordan, but I couldn't focus on that now. We had to survive. The forest was silent except for the sound of Sophie's labored breaths and my pounding heartbeat. We stayed crouched in the bushes, every rustle of leaves sending a fresh wave of fear through me. I didn't know where Jordan was, or if they were even still alive, but I couldn't let that stop me. I had one job now: protect Sophie. "Mom," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling, "are we going to be okay?" I held her close, brushing a strand of hair from her tear-streaked face. "Yes, baby. We'll be okay. I promise." Even as I said it, I wasn't sure if I believed it. We waited until the voices and flashlights faded entirely, then moved deeper into the woods, our footsteps muffled by the soft earth. I spotted an old hunting cabin in the distance, its silhouette barely visible in the pale moonlight. It was dilapidated, but looked sturdy enough to provide a hiding spot. "Sophie, stay close," I said, leading her toward it. Inside, the air was musty, and the floor creaked under our weight. I barricaded the door with an old table and crouched by the window, peering out into the dark. "Are they going to find us?" Sophie asked, her voice barely audible. "Not if I can help it," I replied, scanning the tree line. Hours passed, the silence oppressive. I thought we were safe until I heard the unmistakable crunch of footsteps outside. My stomach dropped. They'd found us. I motioned for Sophie to hide in the corner behind an old wardrobe. "Stay here," I whispered. "Don't make a sound." "Mom, do as I say, Sophie," I said firmly, my heart breaking at the fear in her eyes. The door rattled as someone tried the handle. "Ms. Lane," a voice called out, smooth and menacing. "We know you're in there. There's no point in hiding." My hands shook as I grabbed a rusted crowbar I'd found in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. "You don't have to fight us," the man continued. "We're here for Sophie. Give her to us, and you can walk away unharmed." I stepped into view, the crowbar held tightly in my hands. "She's my daughter," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "You're not taking her." The man chuckled, stepping closer to the window. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but I recognized him as the same man who had approached me at the park. "This isn't about you," he said. "Sophie belongs to the Syndicate. You can't change that." I tightened my grip on the crowbar. "She belongs to me." The man's smile vanished, replaced by cold indifference. "Have it your way." The door splintered as two men kicked it in, their movements precise and practiced. I swung the crowbar at the first one, catching him off guard and sending him stumbling back. The second lunged at me, grabbing my arm and twisting it painfully. "Sophie, run!" I screamed, struggling against his grip. To my surprise, Sophie didn't run. Instead, she grabbed a heavy candlestick from the floor and struck the man holding me. He cursed, releasing me long enough for me to swing the crowbar again, knocking him unconscious. "Sophie," I yelled, pulling her toward the back door. We barely made it outside before more men appeared, their flashlights cutting through the trees. "There's no way out," one of them shouted. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the forest, a gunshot. One of the men dropped to the ground, and I turned to see Jordan emerging from the shadows, a determined look on their face and a gun in hand. "Get down," Jordan shouted, firing another shot that sent the remaining men scrambling for cover. I pulled Sophie behind a tree, shielding her as Jordan moved closer. "You okay?" Jordan asked, their voice breathless. I nodded, my grip on Sophie tightening. "They're everywhere. What do we do?" Jordan's jaw clenched. "We end this." What followed was chaos. Jordan led us through the forest, using their knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the Syndicate's men. Shots rang out, shouts echoed, but somehow we kept moving. When we finally broke through the tree line, a convoy of police cars awaited us. Jordan had called in reinforcements, their contacts coming through just in time. The Syndicate's men hesitated at the sight of the flashing lights, and within moments, they were surrounded. The aftermath was a blur of handcuffs, interrogations, and relief. Sophie clung to me as the police took statements, her small body trembling against mine. "You're safe now," I whispered, kissing the top of her head. "It's over." A week later, I sat in Jordan's office, a sense of calm finally settling over me. "The Syndicate's in shambles," Jordan said. "Between the arrests and the evidence we turned over, their leadership is done for. They won't be coming after Sophie again." I exhaled, the weight of the past few weeks lifting from my shoulders. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Jordan smiled. "You're a fighter, Ms. Lane. You and Sophie both." As I drove home that evening, Sophie sat in the back seat, her eyes brighter than I'd seen them in weeks. "Are we really safe now?" she asked. I glanced at her in the mirror, a smile breaking across my face. "Yes, baby, we're safe. And we always will be." For the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it. The end.